By now, everyone knows the story of the 737 MAX fiasco. After a crash in 2018 and a second in 2019, the plane has basically spelt the end for Boeing, and after 60 years of success, it's ruined the 737 family. To understand how we got here, we have to go back to the 1980s and to the then up-and-coming Airbus. After the success of the A300 and A310, Airbus began work on the A320. The plane was designed to compete with the 737 Classic and the MD-80 family that were currently dominating the short-haul single-aisle market. To set the plane apart, Airbus introduced a host of new features, including fly-by-wire, a full-glass cockpit, and a wider fuselage. On top of this, the A320 had better range and could carry more passengers than either of its competitors. Airbus also claimed that the A320 had 16% less operating costs and burned 35% less fuel than the 737-300. Boeing needed to respond to the A320, but luckily they were working on a new program to replace the 727, a plane that the A320 was aiming to replace. This project was called the 7J7. The proposed plane would have a glass cockpit and fly-by-wire, just like the A320. However, unlike the A320, the plane would actually have rear-mounted engines. Boeing canceled the project in 1987 because of limited interest from airlines and stabilizing oil prices, as the proposed aircraft would use prop fan engines from General Electric, which were hyper-efficient. This didn't change the threat the A320 posed, however, as in 1986 Northwest ordered the plane, and they were the first to operate it in the United States. However, the even bigger blow came in 1992 when longtime Boeing customer United ordered 50 of the plane with an additional 50 options. Airbus's growing momentum finally forced Boeing to act. In June of 1993, they launched the 737X program with a commitment from Southwest for 63 planes. In November, they would officially launch the 737 Next Generation program. With 3 variants in the lineup at launch, the 600, the 700, and the 800, the plane was meant to challenge the dominance of the A320, and now its new variants, the A319 and the A321. Eventually, Boeing would add the 737-900 and 900ER. To make the 737 more competitive with the A320, Boeing upped the cruise speed, they lengthened the fuselage, and added the CFM56-7 engines to the airframe. But by far the best upgrade to the next generation was its cockpit. It actually really changed the 737 Next Generation and caused it to lose some commonality with the Classic. When researching for this video, I came across an online forum talking about the differences in flying the 737 Next Generation and the Classic. In one of the posts on the forum, a pilot theorized that the Next Generation's cockpit could have been upgraded more, but because of pushback from existing 737 operators like Southwest, they wanted more commonality, so Boeing actually didn't go all the way with upgrading the cockpit. Because of how they developed the Next Generation and the choice not to go with the clean sheet aircraft, Boeing would really tie themselves up later on down the road. The 737 Next Generation would end up becoming one of the best-selling planes of all time, selling 7,778 units. Now let's fast forward to 2006. As part of Boeing's Project Yellowstone, a project to completely replace its aircraft portfolio with clean sheet designs, they began researching a replacement for the 737 and 757. This plane was called Y1 or 737 RS during the project phase. It would also have included fly-by-wire and a larger cabin than the A320. A cabin about a foot wider than the 737 Next Generation. This actually would have allowed the plane to carry more cargo in addition to having a more comfortable cabin. Boeing was actually really invested in this project, and they appointed some high-ups in the company like the marketing vice president and the finance director to work on the plane. While we don't have all the specifics of the program, we can assume at least 2 variants of the plane. One to replace the 737-800, seating around 170 people, and one to replace the 757-200. Boeing projected a 2015 first flight date for Y1. However, this really didn't go anywhere after the high development costs of the first Yellowstone aircraft, the 787. Boeing ultimately delayed the decision of the 737 Next Generation replacement because of its limited resources at the time. By 2010, Boeing still hadn't made a decision about what to do for the 737's replacement, and they were seemingly caught off guard when Airbus released the A320neo, which was a re-engined version of the A320. If Boeing knew about the launch of the A320neo, they clearly underestimated the market's appetite for the new aircraft. The A320neo became an instant success, securing over 300 orders on the first day alone. Airlines were drawn in by the promise of 20% better fuel efficiency and seamless integration into existing A320 fleets. The A320neo retained 95% of parts that the A320 had, so airlines could really implement this plane with little to no training at all for crew, ground service, and maintenance. In early 2011, Boeing yet again floated plans for a clean sheet 737 replacement, with the target debut of around 2020. However, airlines started to demand a faster solution, so this was shelved. Also in 2011, American Airlines made waves when it placed an order for 260 Airbus aircraft, comprising of both the A320 family and the A320neo family. This marked the first time in 2 decades that American Airlines placed an order for Airbus aircraft. And it's really a move reminiscent of United's order for 50 A320s in 1992. As part of this same deal, American Airlines announced an order for 200 737s, split between 100 737 next generations and 100 what they were calling re-engined 737s. This plane wasn't officially released yet, but this would be the plane that would eventually become the 737 MAX. This order essentially made American the launch customer for the 737 MAX, quite literally. American even leveraged its position in negotiating, essentially forcing Boeing to recommit to the 737. And this deal was a symbolic shift, showing Boeing's market share slipping, and eventually its downfall, which would come to fruition later in the decade. Boeing's response to the American Airlines order was swift, as they officially announced the MAX in August of 2011. The MAX would feature the new CFM LEAP 1B engines, redesigned winglets, and a host of incremental features to upgrade aerodynamic efficiencies. But unlike Airbus, which had re-engined a plane already built for modern equipment and technology, Boeing was working with a plane that was originally designed in the 1960s. Adding new technologies to this old airframe was like putting a square peg in a round hole.
What about the scrubbers on the command module?
They take square cartridges. The ones on the limb are round.
Well, I suggest you gentlemen invent a way to put a square peg in a round hole.
We gotta find a way to make this fit into the hole for this.
The reason the LEAP 1B engines are so efficient is because they have a high bypass ratio, which makes the engine bigger. Now, this isn't a problem on an aircraft higher up off the ground like the A320, but because of the 737 MAX's low ground clearance, the engines had to be moved forward on the wing. In addition to this, Boeing needed to design structures that could hold the engine above the wing when it's out in front. In addition to moving the engine forward, Boeing also had to partially redesign the MAX landing gear to hold the heavier engine. These engines caused the aircraft to have a tendency to pitch up. This was especially a problem during takeoff, so Boeing engineers knew it couldn't be ignored. To remedy this, they implemented a system called Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, or MCAS. MCAS was designed to automatically push the nose of the aircraft down if the system detected that the aircraft was climbing too steeply, preventing a stall. While it seems like a good fix on paper, it would later prove catastrophic. The system relied on data from a single angle of attack sensor, making it vulnerable to failure. To Boeing, MCAS wasn't just a technical solution, it was a means to an end. It allowed the MAX to maintain regulatory requirements so Boeing wouldn't have to greatly change its type rating. This was crucial to allow the MAX to continue to have an edge over the A320neo. But at this point, the only advantage that the 737 MAX would have over the A320neo was the fact that it was a 737, and it had some commonality with the NG, and this really only applied to 737 customers. The delicate balance of introducing enough new technology to make it appealing to new airlines and keeping the commonality with the 737 NEXT-G defined the 737 MAX. But in trying to preserve market share and meet customer needs, Boeing ultimately rushed and compromised many features of the MAX that were meant to keep it safe. The company placed immense trust in MCAS to fix a problem that the aircraft shouldn't have even had. While the aircraft was efficient and offered plenty of advanced features, it was ultimately too reliant on this technology to keep the aircraft safe. And this all came to a head in 2018 and 2019. Two separate crashes, Lion Air 610 and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, claimed the lives of 346 people. and it exposed the flaws in the 737 MAX's design. Both crashes were caused by MCAS when it incorrectly sensed that the aircraft was stalling and pitched the nose down, crashing the airplane. These disasters weren't just technical failures, they showed what was really going on at Boeing as Boeing started to prioritize profit. The 737 MAX, which was meant to secure Boeing's future in the narrow-body space, ultimately ruined the company, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, and it's going to leave a stain on the 737's legacy forever. It's easy to blame the 737 MAX crisis on Boeing engineers or financial pressure from upper management, but it really stems much deeper from that. It comes from a long history of decisions leading up to this moment, including downplaying competitors, and it really started in the 1980s when they failed to develop a clean sheet design to replace the 727. And as Airbus continued to gain market share in the United States and throughout the world, Boeing was forced to re-engine the 737 Classic and upgrade it even more to create the 737 Next Generation. Then, in the mid and late 2000s, the decision to abandon the Y1 project because of financial difficulties and challenges with the 787 led it to 2010 and the release of the A320neo, where it seems like they downplayed the competition and didn't believe that the A320neo would become as successful as it now has. This obviously caused them to introduce the 737 MAX. Additionally, the culture changes since the McDonnell Douglas merger in 1997 contributed to this too, but I'll be covering that in another video. That's going to wrap up today's video. I hope everyone enjoyed watching. If you did, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time on JP's Aviation. Goodbye.